Well, for more, let's bring in Missouri Republican Senator and member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Eric Schmitt. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Good to be with you, Jackie.
Good morning. So in the aftermath of all of this, the administration has been somewhat leaning into messaging that this was a law enforcement operation, not a military operation. Listen here.
This was a law enforcement exercise. It was the Department of War in support of the Department of Justice pulling out an indicted person who ultimately will face justice.
But earlier yesterday, the president did not mince any words. He called this a military operation. He revealed these plans for the U.S. to run Venezuela until it finds acceptable new leadership and justified plans to sell its oil. Listen here.
We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain.
There are many justifications for regime change. Does this change in tone now signal to you that the White House is having a tough time convincing its base that running a Latin American country is America first?
Well, clearly, no, I don't think so. I think this is clearly a law enforcement action. The military was there to provide support to make sure an indicted criminal would be arrested. I think if this was something bigger than that, the military posture would have been much different. This was extracting one individual. The vice president has now in Venezuela been sworn in as president. But Jackie, I think if you take a step back, there's two very important points to mention about this. First of all, the mission itself. No military on the planet could pull this off, just like no military on the planet could drop bunker-busting bombs on something the size of a kitchen table to disarm effectively the nuclear program of Iran. And so the world is watching that. This is military might at its finest. And I think that is a good deterrent. Secondly, I do think it's important to note that this is a real shift. So when President Trump talks about this sort of Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, a shift away from so many over the last 30 years with their obsession of the Middle East and Europe, this is a pivot to the Western Hemisphere, our homeland, and of course the Indo-Pacific is a big concern for us too. So we're just simply not going to tolerate these tin-pot dictators who flood our country with criminals, who flood our country with drugs, that have hosted the Chinese and other adversaries as a base of operation for them. We're not going to allow that in the Western Hemisphere. So when President Trump says that, he means that. And I think that's very important to note here as well.
And to your point, there have been no shortage of analysts praising this operation and saying that Iran, Russia, China are likely taking note and rightly concerned. At the same time, the president talked about reasserting dominance in the Western Hemisphere, as you just touched on, the new Monroe Doctrine. He called it the Donroe Doctrine. But Congressman Don Bacon raised this point, quote, "My main concern is now Russia will use this to justify their illegal and barbaric military actions against Ukraine, or China to justify an invasion of Taiwan. Freedom and rule of law were defended last night, but dictators will try to exploit this to rationalize their selfish objectives." Now, the president's obviously effectuating regime change without any sort of an invasion, but should Congress take some action to validate his authority, especially as he's giving warning shots to Colombia and Cuba?
Well, clearly, again, this was completely justified as a law enforcement action. Maduro will now stand trial in the United States. He'll have his day in court. But look, I think that the idea that somehow the permanent Washington class, Jackie, that again has no problem with defending the borders of other countries. I mean, Joe Biden had a blank check for an endless war in Ukraine to defend the sovereignty of that country, but cared very little about the sovereignty of our own country. This president is saying that you will respect our borders. We're not going to allow you to flood illegal immigrants in here, gang members. They emptied their prisons in Caracas, sent them to the United States. They're sending drugs to the United States. We're not going to tolerate that anymore. So when you talk about this Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, that's exactly what it means. And so this president, though, also, I think it's important to note, gave plenty of off-ramps to Maduro. He seeks peace first. He sought diplomacy first. And by the way, trying to resolve not just 8 other wars that have happened around the world, but also with Russia and Ukraine. So you have a president now in a country that people respect. I think it's a restrained foreign policy, but when it's time to act, we will use overwhelming force. It's a Jacksonian kind of throwback in the face of this Wilsonian adventurism we've seen all around the world for 30 years. I mean, some of the same critics of this have no problem with sending our blood and treasure halfway around the world, but somehow they're being critical of us defending our own neck of the woods so that our backyard is safe for Americans.
Do you think if the White House pursued authorization from Congress that it would pass? Because you do have Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance. She said regime change, funding foreign wars, and Americans' tax dollars being consistently funneled to foreign causes, foreigners both home and abroad, and foreign governments, while Americans are consistently facing increased costs of living, housing, health care, learn about scams and fraud of their tax dollars, is what has most Americans enraged. This is what many in MAGA thought they voted to end. Boy, were we wrong. Is she in the minority there? You know, how many Republicans feel that way?
Well, I think 2 points. We're not at war in the legal sense. These are core Article 2 powers. I've reviewed the 40-plus page legal memo about the activity that's happening on the open seas with a narco-terrorist. This law enforcement activity is completely justified. So these are core Article 2 powers. I would also point out, too, that, you know, when you talk about traditional regime change we saw in the Middle East, that was the toppling of an entire government. And then us there for 10, 20 years trying to create some democracy in the sands of the Middle East or some tribal backwater. That's not what's happening in Venezuela. They have a government. Maduro's gone, but they have a president that's been sworn that was their vice president. Now, we do have core interests there. I think this administration's made it clear they're going to continue to engage at the highest level with that government. We have interests. Of course, oil companies are going to get the oil back that was stolen from them. We have a military flotilla on the ready, but you don't see boots on the ground. This is not a military posture for some sort of takeover. That's not what this is. This was essentially giving a guy an off-ramp who's been destructive to the United States. He didn't do it. Now he's in U.S. custody. Venezuela is going to move forward, but we do not want to have China operating freely in Venezuela in our backyard, just like we don't want China operating both ends of the Panama Canal. So a message is being delivered that we have core strategic interests in the Western Hemisphere, and we will use our military might to defend those if necessary. So again, I think this is a very important pivot and something very different than we've seen over the last 30 years, which I applaud.
And just with about 15 seconds left, you know, we didn't hear yesterday any call for elections. How soon does that need to happen, and do you expect the White House to start, you know, endorsing that plan, vocalizing it?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, Venezuela, they have a government that's operating. Clearly, we have an interest in some of the things that happen. We don't want to see the drugs and the criminals come here. The natural resources, we don't want China, Russia, Iran to have access to those. And so they're going to move forward. But this is about stabilization. This is about making sure they can have that transition. And that's what our presence, again, not actually in the country, but off the coast of the country is all about.
There need to be a timeline on that, though, I guess is the point I'm getting to?
Well, I mean, we're a day into this, so I think they're moving expeditiously. They understand that Maduro's gone, and I think that this will continue to unfold. And so I wouldn't want to deal with those sort of hypotheticals, but this is not a long-term engagement. I mean, this is making sure the Venezuelan people can actually, you know, they've been sort of ridden of Maduro now. They're going to move forward. And again, the U.S. has a very important interest here in the Western Hemisphere that Venezuela isn't the playground for the CCP, which is what the CCP wanted. By the way, Jackie, one last point. It's very interesting that Chinese delegation was there.
Yeah.
If you don't think China noticed that we were able to do this under the cover of darkness without them knowing anything about it, that's a very important point, too, for deterrence as well.
And a lot of Maduro's victims all over the world really celebrating this news today. Senator Eric Schmidt, thank you so much for joining us in the Sunday briefing. Really appreciate it.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.